They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but nobody tells you how satisfying it tastes when it's been simmering for 72 years. My name is Amy Richardson, and I used to believe that family meant everything. I used to believe that love was unconditional, that loyalty was inherited, and that the people who shared your name would never leave you standing alone when you needed them most. I was a fool. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What happened to me at my father's funeral wasn't just abandonment, it was the final, cruel confirmation of a truth I'd been too blind to see my entire life. My family didn't love me. They used me. They took everything I had to give, and then discarded me like yesterday's newspaper when it was convenient. But here's what they didn't know. Daddy had been watching them too, and he'd been planning. The story I'm about to tell you will make you angry. It will make you question everyone in your life who takes you for granted. It will make you wonder if kindness is truly a virtue or just another word for weakness. But most importantly, it will show you what happens when a woman finally stops being everyone's doormat and starts being her own advocate. October 23rd. The date is burned into my memory like a brand, marking the day my life split into two distinct chapters, before and after. Before, when I was Amy Richardson, the devoted daughter, the reliable sister, the woman everyone could count on. After, when I became someone else entirely, someone who finally understood that respect isn't given, it's demanded. The morning. Air carried the scent of dying leaves and the promise of winter as I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, adjusting the black dress I'd worn to too many funerals over the years. At 72, I'd buried both my parents' siblings, countless friends, and now, finally, my father. Harold Richardson had been 91 when he passed, sharp as a tack until the very end, though his body had finally surrendered to time. I smoothed down the wrinkles in my dress, noting how the fabric had grown looser over the past year. Grief has a way of eating at you from the inside out, I'd learned. Daddy's illness had consumed my life for the better part of 2 years, and now that he was gone, I felt hollow, like a house after all the furniture has been moved out. The funeral home had requested that family arrive an hour early for a private viewing before the service. I'd spent the previous evening polishing Daddy's shoes, the good ones he'd worn to church every Sunday for 40 years, and selecting his favorite tie, the navy blue one with tiny silver crosses that I'd given him for Father's Day decades ago. These small acts of care had become my way of coping, a final chance to mother the man who'd raised me with such gentle strength. When I arrived at Henderson Sons Funeral Home, the parking lot was already half full. My heart lifted slightly, thinking perhaps the family had come early to pay their respects privately, to share memories and comfort each other as families should. How naive I was. Inside, the viewing room was elegant in its simplicity, with soft lighting and arrangements of white lilies and roses surrounding Daddy's casket. He looked peaceful, finally free from the pain that had plagued his final months. I approached slowly, my heels clicking against the polished floor, and placed my hand on the cool metal of the casket's edge. "You look handsome, Daddy," I whispered, adjusting his tie with trembling fingers. "Just like you did when you walked me down the aisle 48 years ago." The memory hit me like a physical blow. My wedding day, when Daddy had taken my arm and told me how proud he was of the woman I'd become, how he'd insisted on paying for everything despite my protests, how he'd danced with me to Daddy's little girl, while tears streamed down both our faces. Robert, my late husband, had loved Daddy like his own father, and when Robert passed from cancer 12 years ago, Daddy had been the one to hold me together. "Amy, there you are." The voice startled me from my reverie. I turned to see my sister Linda approaching, her designer heels clicking authoritatively across the floor. At 67, Linda was 5 years younger than me, but had always carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd never questioned her place in the world. Her black dress was clearly expensive, probably purchased specifically for the occasion, and her silver hair was styled in the kind of perfect waves that only come from a professional salon. Linda. I smiled, grateful for the company. I was just... The flowers look nice, she interrupted, glancing around the room with the detached air of someone inspecting a hotel room. Though I told them we wanted white roses, not these mixed arrangements. I specifically said white roses. They're beautiful, I said softly. Daddy would have loved them. He always said flowers were God's way of painting the world. Linda's expression softened slightly. He did say that, didn't he? I'd forgotten. She paused, then added, Michael and Jennifer are running late, as usual. Traffic from the city, you know how it is. Michael was our youngest brother, 59 and still playing the role of the baby of the family despite being a grandfather himself. Jennifer was Linda's daughter, my niece, who'd inherited her mother's sharp edges and her grandfather's stubborn streak. They both lived in Chicago now, successful and busy with their own lives, returning to Millbrook only for holidays and funerals. That's fine, I said. We have time. Did you bring the eulogy? Linda asked, and I noticed she was checking her phone as she spoke. I hope you kept it short. You know how these things can drag on. The eulogy. I'd spent 3 weeks writing and rewriting it, trying to capture the essence of the man who'd been my anchor for 7 decades. Yes, I have it. Good. I meant to write something, but work has been absolutely insane lately. The Henderson account is demanding a complete restructuring of their marketing strategy, and I've been putting in 12-hour days. Linda worked at an advertising firm in Springfield, a job that had always seemed to define her more than her relationships with people ever had. Before I could respond, the door opened and Michael walked in, his wife Carol close behind. Michael had inherited Daddy's height but none of his grace, and at 59, he'd developed the soft middle and ruddy complexion of a man who'd never met a buffet he didn't like. Carol, his second wife, was a pleasant woman who'd always seemed slightly overwhelmed by the Richardson family dynamics. Sorry we're late, Michael said, loosening his tie. Traffic was a nightmare, and then we couldn't find parking. This place needs a bigger lot. It's fine, I said, moving to embrace him. I'm just glad you're here. Michael's hug was brief and distracted. So, what's the plan? When does this thing start? The service begins at 2, I said. We have about 30 minutes for family time. 30 minutes? He checked his watch. That seems like a lot. I mean, what are we supposed to do for 30 minutes? The question hung in the air like a challenge. What were we supposed to do? Mourn? Remember? Celebrate a life well lived? Say goodbye to the man who'd given us everything? We could share memories, I suggested tentatively. Talk about what Daddy meant to us. Linda and Michael exchanged a look that I pretended not to notice. That's sweet, Amy, Linda said in the tone she might use with a child. But we'll have plenty of time for that later. Later? There was always later with my family. Later we'd talk, later we'd visit, later we'd make time for what mattered. But later had a way of never arriving. Jennifer arrived 20 minutes before the service, breathless and apologetic. At 34, she was a carbon copy of her mother, all sharp angles and efficient movements. She embraced me quickly, her perfume overwhelming in its intensity. I'm so sorry, Aunt Amy. The babysitter was late, and then Emma had a meltdown about her Halloween costume, and David had to take a work call. It's okay, sweetheart, I said, though something in my chest tightened at the easy way she dismissed the importance of the day. You're here now. The service itself was beautiful. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Reverend Murphy, who'd known Daddy for 30 years, spoke about his faith, his devotion to family, and his quiet acts of kindness that had touched countless lives. I delivered the eulogy I'd labored over, my voice steady, despite the tears that threatened to fall. I spoke about Daddy's love of gardening, how he'd taught me to plant tomatoes and prune roses. I talked about his Sunday morning pancakes, his terrible jokes, and his unwavering belief that every problem had a solution if you just looked hard enough. When I finished speaking, I looked out at the congregation and saw faces I recognized from decades of church services, community events, and neighborhood gatherings. Mrs. Patterson from next door, who Daddy had helped with her groceries every Tuesday for the past 5 years. Tom Bradley, who'd worked with Daddy at the hardware store for 20 years. The Hendersons, whose son Daddy had coached in Little League. These people had come to honor a man who'd made their lives better in small but meaningful ways. My family sat in the front row, Linda checking her phone periodically, Michael shifting restlessly in his seat, Carol looking appropriately solemn, and Jennifer texting discreetly. They were there, but they weren't present. Not really. After the service, we followed the hearse to Hillcrest Cemetery for the burial. The October wind whipped through the trees, sending leaves dancing across the grass as we gathered around the gravesite. Daddy's plot was next to Mama's, who'd passed 8 years earlier. Soon, they'd be together again, and I found comfort in that thought. The graveside service was brief but meaningful. As the casket was lowered into the ground, I felt something inside me break and mend simultaneously. Daddy was at peace now, free from pain and worry. But I was alone in a way I'd never been before. People began to disperse, offering final condolences and promises to stay in touch. I stood by the grave, not ready to leave yet, watching the groundskeepers respectfully wait nearby. Mrs. Patterson approached and took my hand. "He was a good man, Amy," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "One of the best I ever knew." "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. That means everything to me." "You know, he was so proud of you," she continued, "always talking about how you took such good care of him, how you gave up so much to make sure he was comfortable. He used to say you were his greatest blessing." The words hit me like a physical blow, but in a good way. Daddy had noticed. He'd appreciated the sacrifices I'd made, the life I'd put on hold to care for him. Mrs. Patterson squeezed my hand once more and walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the settling dusk. That's when I realized I was truly alone. I turned around, expecting to see Linda, Michael, Jennifer, and Carol waiting for me by the cars. Instead, I saw empty parking spaces where their vehicles had been. The cemetery was nearly deserted except for the groundskeepers and a few stragglers from other services. They were gone. My family, the people I'd spent my entire life putting first, the people I'd sacrificed for, worried about, and loved unconditionally, had left me standing alone at my father's grave. I stood there for a long moment, the wind cutting through my coat, trying to process what had happened. Surely there was a mistake. Surely they'd just gone ahead to the church for the reception dinner and expected me to follow. But even as I tried to rationalize their absence, I knew the truth. They'd left because they could, because they'd always been able to count on Amy to handle things, to find her own way, to never complain or demand attention. The walk back to the funeral home felt like miles instead of yards. My car was one of only 3 left in the parking lot, and suddenly the reality of my situation hit me fully. I was stranded, not just at the cemetery, but in life. The people I'd built my entire existence around had literally driven away and left me behind. I sat in my car for a long time, my hands gripping the steering wheel, staring at the funeral home where I'd said goodbye to my father just hours earlier. The anger started slowly, like a small flame catching dry kindling. Then it spread, growing hotter and brighter until it consumed every other emotion in my chest. 72 years of being the responsible one. 72 years of being the daughter who stayed close to home, who checked on the parents, who remembered birthdays and anniversaries. 72 years of being the sister who loaned money without expecting repayment, who provided free babysitting, who hosted every holiday gathering. 72 years of being taken for granted. And for what? So I could stand alone at my father's grave while the people I'd sacrificed everything for drove home to their comfortable lives, probably already planning to resume their routines as if nothing had changed. The anger burned bright and pure, and for the first time in my life I welcomed it. It felt powerful, cleansing, like a fire that burns away everything weak and dead to make room for new growth. I started the car and drove home, my mind racing with thoughts I'd never allowed myself to have before. My house felt different when I walked in that evening. The silence was heavier, more complete. Daddy's room, which I'd kept exactly as he'd left it, seemed to echo with his absence. But for the first time since his death, I didn't feel his loss as an overwhelming grief. Instead, I felt something else entirely. I felt free. Free from the obligation to be perfect, to be selfless, to always put others first. Free from the need to earn love that was never truly given. Free from the fear of disappointing people who had just demonstrated how little they valued me. I poured myself a glass of wine, something I rarely did, and sat in Daddy's favorite chair. The house creaked around me, settling into the night, and I allowed myself to really think about what had happened today. Not just the abandonment at the cemetery, but the years of small dismissals that had led to this moment. The canceled visits, the forgotten birthdays, the requests for money that were never reciprocated. The assumption that Amy would always be there, always available, always understanding. The phone rang around 9 o'clock. I looked at the caller ID and saw Linda's name. For a moment, I considered not answering, but old habits die hard. Hello? Amy, hi, I just wanted to make sure you got home okay. We looked for you after the burial, but you seem to have left. The lie came so easily to her, so naturally, that it took my breath away. I was standing right there at the grave, Linda. You all left me. Left you? Don't be dramatic, Amy. We assumed you wanted some private time with Dad. We didn't want to intrude. Another lie, delivered with the confidence of someone who'd never been challenged. You left me stranded at the cemetery. You have a car, don't you? I mean, really. Amy, you're being a bit ridiculous. We're all grieving here. Ridiculous. She thought my hurt was ridiculous. The woman who hadn't visited Daddy once during his final month was leacating me about grief. I see, I said quietly. Look, I know today was emotional for all of us. Why? Don't you come to dinner Sunday? We can talk about Dad's things, figure out what to do with the house. I'm sure there are decisions to make. Decisions to make. Daddy's things. The house. Of course that's what she was thinking about. Not my feelings. Not the family relationship, but the practical matters that would require attention. And naturally, she assumed I would handle them. I'll think about it, I said. Great. Oh, and Amy? You might want to call that lawyer Dad was working with. What was his name? Whitman? We should probably find out about the will and all that legal stuff. You know how complicated these things can get. Mr. Whitman, Daddy's lawyer, the man who'd been coming to the house regularly over the past 6 months, always for private meetings that ended when I brought tea and cookies. I'd assumed they were updating Daddy's will, making sure everything was in order. But now I wondered if there was more to those visits than I'd realized. I'll take care of it, I said, and I meant it more than Linda could possibly know. After I hung up, I sat in the silence and thought about Mr. Whitman's visits. Daddy had always been a private man about financial matters, but he'd grown even more secretive in recent months. He'd installed a safe in his bedroom, had whispered phone conversations that stopped when I entered the room, and had begun asking me odd questions about my siblings' behavior and attitudes. The memory surfaced slowly, like a photograph developing. 2 weeks before Daddy's death, he'd asked me to sit with him in his room. He'd taken my hand and said, "Amy, I want you to know that I see everything. I see how much you've given up for this family, and I see how little you've gotten in return. I want you to know that I'm proud of you, and I'm going to make sure you're taken care of." At the time, I'd thought he was just being sentimental, a dying man trying to comfort his devoted daughter. But now I wondered if he'd been trying to tell me something more specific. The next morning, I called Mr. Whitman's office and made an appointment for that afternoon. His secretary, Mrs. Collier, had known me for years and greeted me with genuine warmth when I arrived. "Amy, dear, I'm so sorry for your loss. Your father was a wonderful man." "Thank you, Mrs. Collier. He thought very highly of you as well." Mr. Whitman's office was exactly as I remembered it from my childhood. Dark wood, leather chairs, and law books lining every wall. He'd been Daddy's lawyer for over 30 years, handling everything from property transfers to business contracts. He was approaching 80 himself, but his mind was sharp and his manner kind. "Amy," he said, rising from behind his desk to embrace me. "How are you holding up, my dear?" "I'm managing, Mr. Whitman. Thank you for asking." "Please sit. Can Mrs. Collier get you some tea?" "That would be lovely." When we were settled with our tea, Mr. Whitman opened a thick file folder and pulled out several documents. "I suppose you're here about your father's will." "Yes, Linda mentioned that I should call you about the legal arrangements." He nodded slowly, studying my face. "Amy, your father and I had many long conversations over the past year. He was very concerned about how his passing would affect you, and he wanted to make sure you were protected." "Protected from what?" "From being taken advantage of. From being treated as you've always been treated." His voice was gentle but firm. "Your father was a very observant man, Amy. He noticed things." My heart began to race. "What kind of things?" "He noticed that you were the only one who visited him regularly, the only one who cared for him during his illness, the only one who made sacrifices to ensure his comfort and dignity. He also noticed that your siblings only contacted him when they needed something, usually money." The bluntness of his words shocked me. "Mr. Whitman, I don't think—" "Amy, dear, your father documented everything. Phone calls, visits, requests for financial assistance. He kept detailed records of every interaction with your family members for the past 18 months. Why? Because he wanted to make sure his will reflected the reality of his relationships with his children, not the fantasy of what family should be." Mr. Whitman pulled out a document and placed it before me. "This is your father's will, Amy. It's quite detailed, and I think you should read it carefully." My hands trembled as I picked up the document. The legal language was dense, but certain phrases jumped out at me. Sole beneficiary, primary inheritor, conditional bequests, and documented patterns of behavior. "I don't understand," I said, looking up at Mr. Whitman. "This says I inherit everything, the house, the investments, the life insurance, everything. But what about Linda and Michael?" "Read the conditional clauses," he said gently. I found the section he was referring to and read it twice before the meaning became clear. Linda and Michael were mentioned in the will, but their inheritances were conditional on their behavior toward me and their demonstration of genuine family loyalty and respect. The will outlined specific criteria they would need to meet, including a formal apology for years of taking advantage of my generosity, a commitment to treating me as an equal family member rather than a servant, and a demonstration of genuine care for my well-being. I struggled to find words. "This is incredible. Your father was quite specific about his intentions, Amy. He said he'd spent his whole life watching you give and give and give while your siblings took and took and took. He decided it was time for the tables to turn. But they'll be furious. They'll contest the will, surely. They can certainly try, but your father was very thorough in his documentation. He has recordings, Amy. Conversations with Linda and Michael where they made it clear they considered you their personal banker and caretaker. He has emails, text messages, and witness statements. He built an ironclad case for why you deserve the inheritance and why they don't. Recordings. Daddy had been recording conversations with my siblings. The revelation should have shocked me, but instead I felt a strange sense of validation. He'd seen what I'd seen, felt what I'd felt, and he'd decided to do something about, There's more, Mr. Whitman continued. Your father has also left specific instructions for how the conditional bequests should be handled. If Linda and Michael want to inherit anything, they must meet with you and this office to discuss their past behavior and make genuine amends. It's not about money, Amy. It's about respect. I sat back in my chair, the weight of this revelation settling over me like a warm blanket. Daddy had seen everything. He'd witnessed my sacrifices, my pain, my loneliness, and he'd decided to give me something I'd never had before: power. When do I tell them? I asked. That's up to you, my dear. But I would suggest you think carefully about how you want to handle this. Your father has given you a tremendous gift, not just the inheritance, but the opportunity to finally be treated with the respect you deserve. Don't waste it. As I drove home that evening, my mind raced with possibilities. For the first time in my life, I held the cards. I had the power to demand better treatment, to set boundaries, to refuse to be taken for granted. The family that had left me standing alone at Daddy's grave was about to learn what it felt like to be at someone else's mercy. The phone was ringing when I walked into the house. Michael's name appeared on the caller ID, and I almost smiled. They were so predictable. Hello, Michael. Amy, hey. Look, I've been thinking about what Linda said, about Dad's will and everything. We should probably all get together and talk about this stuff. You know, make sure everything's handled properly. Properly? I repeated. Yeah, you know how these legal things can be. Lots of paperwork, lots of details. We don't want anything to fall through the cracks. I see. And what exactly are you concerned might fall through the cracks? Well, you know, the house, Dad's investments, life insurance, all that stuff. We should probably divide everything fairly between the three of us. Get it all sorted out quickly so we can move on. Divide everything fairly. Move on quickly. As if Daddy's death was just another task to be completed, another inconvenience, to be managed efficiently. Actually, Michael, I've already spoken with Mr. Whitman about the will. Oh, good. So you know what we're dealing with then. When do you want to meet? I can drive down this weekend. I don't think that will be necessary. What do you mean? I mean, the will is quite clear about Dad's intentions. There's really nothing to discuss. Amy, you're not making sense. Of course there's stuff to discuss. We're talking about a significant estate here. Yes, we are, and it's all mine. The silence on the other end of the line was profound. When Michael finally spoke, his voice was tight with disbelief. What did you just say? I said it's all mine, Michael. The house, the investments, the life insurance, everything. Dad left it all to me. That's impossible. Dad wouldn't do that. He loved all of us equally. Did he? Because I have to tell you, Michael, the evidence suggests otherwise. Evidence? What evidence? Amy, you're clearly upset and not thinking straight. Dad would never cut Linda and me out of his will. Never. He didn't cut you out entirely. You and Linda can still inherit something, but there are conditions. Conditions? What kind of conditions? You'll have to ask Mr. Whitman about that. I'm sure he'll be happy to explain your options. Amy, this is crazy. You can't just steal our inheritance. I'm not stealing anything, Michael. I'm simply accepting what Dad chose to give me, just like you and Linda have been accepting what I've chosen to give you for the past 40 years. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm done, Michael. Done being your backup bank account. Done being your free babysitter. Done being the family member who can always be counted on to handle the difficult stuff while you live your life. Done being left standing alone at Dad's grave while you drive, away to your comfortable life without so much as a goodbye. Oh, come on, Amy. You're being ridiculous about yesterday. We thought you wanted privacy. You thought I wanted privacy? Or you thought it was easier to leave than to actually deal with grief like a family? You're really going to make a big deal out of this? Yes, Michael. I'm going to make a very big deal out of this. Because it is a big deal. Daddy's death was a big deal. Our family relationships are a big deal. And the way you and Linda have treated me for decades is a very big deal. Amy, look, if you're upset about something, we can talk about it. But you can't just keep Dad's entire estate because you're having some kind of emotional breakdown. I'm not having a breakdown, Michael. I'm having a breakthrough. There's a difference. This is insane. I'm calling Linda. You do that. And when you talk to her, you can both call Mr. Whitman and make appointments to discuss your options. I'm sure he'll be very thorough in explaining what Dad expected from you. I hung up before he could respond, and for the first time in days, I felt genuinely happy. The anger was still there, burning bright and clean, but now it was accompanied by something else. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, I could finally have the family relationships I'd always wanted. Or if not, hope that I could finally have the freedom I'd never dared to dream of. The house felt different that night. It felt like mine, really mine, not just the place where I'd lived while caring for everyone else. I walked through the rooms, seeing them with new eyes, imagining how I might change things to suit my own tastes for the first time in my life. Tomorrow, Linda would call. She would be furious, demanding, probably threatening legal action. But tonight, I was going to savor this feeling of power, this sensation of finally being in control of my own destiny. I poured another glass of wine and sat in Daddy's chair, and I could swear I felt his presence with me, approving, encouraging, telling me it was time to stop being everyone's doormat and start being my own advocate. The phone rang again, but I didn't answer it. Whatever crisis my family was having, whatever demands they were making, whatever guilt they were trying to impose, it could wait. For the first time in 72 years, Amy Richardson was putting herself first, and it felt absolutely magnificent. The morning sun filtered through my kitchen curtains as I sat at the breakfast table, sipping coffee that actually tasted good for the first time in weeks. Everything seemed sharper, more vivid, as if I'd been living my life through a fog that had suddenly lifted. The phone had rung 17 times since I'd hung up on Michael the night before, but I'd ignored every call. Let them stew in their panic and confusion. They'd had 72 years to treat me with respect, and they'd chosen differently at every turn. I was buttering my toast when the doorbell rang, followed by aggressive knocking. Through the peephole, I could see Linda's perfectly styled silver hair and the rigid set of her shoulders that meant she was in full battle mode. She'd driven the hour and a half from Springfield, probably breaking several speed limits in her urgency to confront me. "Amy, open this door right now!" Her voice carried the authority she'd perfected in corporate boardrooms, the tone that brooked no argument and expected immediate compliance. I took another sip of my coffee, savoring both the rich flavor and the novelty of not rushing to accommodate someone else's demands. Let her wait. Let her knock. Let her experience just a fraction of the frustration I'd felt standing alone at Daddy's grave while she drove away without a backward glance. "Amy Richardson, I know you're in there. We need to talk about this ridiculous situation immediately." Ridiculous. There was that word again, the one she'd used to dismiss my hurt. The night before, everything that didn't fit Linda's worldview was ridiculous. My emotions, my needs, my right to be treated with basic human dignity. I finished my toast slowly, deliberately, then walked to the front door and opened it. Linda stood there in her expensive wool coat and designer shoes, her face flushed with anger and exertion. Behind her, Michael's car sat in my driveway, and I could see him talking animatedly on his cell phone, probably trying to reach Mr. Whitman's office to demand an emergency meeting. "Good morning, Linda. You're up early." "Don't you dare good morning me, Amy Richardson. What the hell do you think you're doing?" "I'm having breakfast. Would you like some coffee? You look like you could use it." Her eyes flashed with fury to cut the innocent act. "Michael told me what you said about Dad's will. This is insane, and you know it." "What's insane about a father leaving his estate to the daughter who actually took care of him?" "Because it's not fair. Dad loved all three of us equally. He wouldn't play favorites like this." I studied her face, noting the way her mouth twisted when she said the word fair. Linda had never cared about fairness when it came to dividing responsibility. She'd never worried about fairness when I was the one spending every holiday cooking and cleaning while she showed up empty-handed expecting to be served. Fairness had never been a concern when I was lending money I couldn't afford to lose while she bought new cars and vacation homes. "Come in," I said, stepping back from the door. "We should have this conversation properly." She swept past me into the living room, her heels clicking against the hardwood floors with staccato intensity. Michael ended his phone call and followed, his face red with frustration, and his usually jovial demeanor replaced by something harder and more desperate. "Amy, this is crazy," he said without preamble. "I've been trying to call Whitman's office, but they won't discuss anything with me. They say I need to make an appointment through you." "That's correct. That's not how this works. We're family. We have rights." "Do we? Because yesterday, when I needed my family most, you both seemed to forget that fact entirely." Linda had been pacing the length of my living room, but now she stopped and whirled to face me. "Oh, for God's sake, Amy, are you still harping on that? We've already explained what happened yesterday. We thought you wanted private time at the cemetery. You thought I wanted to be abandoned. There's a difference." "Nobody abandoned you," Michael said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You're blowing this way out of proportion." I walked to the mantelpiece and picked up a framed photograph of our family from Christmas 3 years ago. We were all gathered around Daddy's tree, smiling for the camera. But I could see the truth now that I'd been blind to then. Linda was checking her phone even as she smiled. Michael was already reaching for his coat, eager to leave. Only Daddy and I were fully present in the moment. "Let me tell you about proportion," I said, setting the photograph down carefully. "For 47 years since Robert died, I've been the family member everyone could count on. When Mama got sick, who rearranged her entire life to provide care. When Daddy needed surgery, who took leave from work to be his advocate. When your kids needed babysitting, Linda, who dropped everything to help. When your business was failing, Michael, who co-signed loans and never asked for repayment." "That's different," Linda said quickly. "That's just what families do for each other." "Is it? Because I don't remember either of you ever doing those things for me. I don't remember you taking care of Robert when he was dying of cancer. I don't remember you helping me through my grief. I don't remember you offering to take care of our parents so I could have a break, or loaning me money when I was struggling, or showing up when I needed support." "You never asked," Michael said defensively. "I shouldn't have had to ask. That's the point. Real family doesn't wait to be asked. Real family notices when someone they love is struggling and steps up without being prompted." The silence that followed was thick with uncomfortable truth. I could see them processing my words, trying to find arguments that would absolve them of responsibility while maintaining their claim to Daddy's estate. "Look," Linda said finally, her tone shifting to the reasonable, problem-solving voice she used in business meetings. "Maybe we haven't been as attentive as we should have been. Maybe we took you for granted sometimes. but that doesn't mean Dad should have cut us out of his will. That's not how family works. How does family work, Linda? Because from where I'm sitting, family has always worked like this. Amy gives, Amy sacrifices, Amy handles the difficult situations, and everyone else takes what they need and moves on with their lives. That's not fair, Michael protested. We appreciate everything you've done. Do you? When was the last time either of you thanked me for anything? When was the last time you asked how I was doing without needing something from me? When was the last time you remembered my birthday without Facebook reminding you? They exchanged glances, and I could see them struggling to remember. The fact that they had to think about it told me everything I needed to know. This is getting us nowhere, Linda said briskly. The bottom line is that Dad's will needs to be contested. It's obviously the product of diminished capacity or undue influence. No rational person would leave their entire estate to one child while cutting out the others. Undue influence, I repeated slowly. You think I manipulated a 91-year-old man into changing his will? I think you were the only one with access to him during his final months, she said bluntly. I think you had plenty of opportunity to poison his mind against us. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. After everything I'd sacrificed, everything I'd given up to care for our father, she was suggesting I'd manipulated him for financial gain. Get out, I said quietly. Amy, let's not be hasty. Michael started. Get out of my house, both of you, right now. Your house? Linda's voice rose to a near shriek. This isn't your house, Amy. This is the family home. This belongs to all of us. No, Linda. According to Dad's will, this house belongs to me, just like everything else he worked for his entire life. And since it's my house, I'm telling you to leave. We're not going anywhere until we settle this, she said, crossing her arms defiantly. You can't just steal our inheritance and expect us to walk away quietly. I walked to the telephone and picked up the receiver. Then I'll call the police and have you removed for trespassing. You wouldn't dare. I began dialing. Try me. Michael grabbed Linda's arm. Come on, Lynn, let's go. We'll handle this through lawyers. Good luck with that, I said, hanging up the phone. Mr. Whitman will be happy to explain your options. All you have to do is make an appointment and listen to what Daddy actually wanted. Linda's face was a mask of fury and disbelief. This isn't over, Amy. We'll fight this. We'll prove that will is invalid. You're welcome to try, but you might want to ask Mr. Whitman about the evidence Daddy compiled first. Ask him about the recordings. The color drained from both their faces. What recordings? Michael asked, weakly. The ones Daddy made of your phone conversations over the past 2 years. The ones where you made it very clear what you really thought of me and what you expected from this family. I could see the memories flooding back. The careless comments. The assumption that I would always be available. The casual dismissal of my feelings and needs. How many times had they talked about me like I was the family servant rather than their sister? How many times had they taken my generosity for granted while complaining about having to deal with our parents' needs? He wouldn't have done that, Linda whispered, but I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. Daddy was sharper than any of us gave him credit for. He saw everything, heard everything, and he documented it all. He knew exactly what kind of people you'd become, and he made his will accordingly. They left then, Linda slamming the door so hard that one of Mama's china plates rattled on its shelf. I watched through the window as they stood by Michael's car having what was clearly a heated argument, their gestures sharp and urgent. Finally, they got in and drove away, leaving tire marks on my driveway. I poured myself another cup of coffee and sat in Daddy's chair, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness. The satisfaction came from finally standing up for myself, from refusing to be bullied or guilt-tripped into submission. The sadness came from the realization that my family relationships had always been built on such shallow foundations that they couldn't survive the first real test of fairness. The phone rang again, but this time it was Mr. Whitman's office. Mrs. Collier's voice was warm but professional. "Amy, dear, I have Linda Richardson on the other line demanding an immediate appointment to discuss her father's will. She's quite agitated." "I imagine she is. When can you see her?" "Mr. Whitman has an opening tomorrow at 2:00. Should I schedule both her and Michael together?" "That would probably be best. They'll want to present a united front." "Very well. And Amy? Mr. Whitman asked me to tell you that he's reviewed your father's instructions again, and everything is in perfect order. You have nothing to worry about legally." "Thank you, Mrs. Collier. That's reassuring." After I hung up, I wandered through the house, really seeing it for the first time as my own space. The furniture was a mixture of pieces I'd inherited from Mama and things Daddy had chosen over the years, but none of it reflected my personal taste. I'd been living in everyone else's choices for so long that I'd forgotten I was allowed to have preferences of my own. In Daddy's room, I found the safe he'd installed 6 months earlier. The combination was my birthday, a detail that brought tears to my eyes. Inside were documents, photographs, and a thick manila envelope with my name, written on it in his careful handwriting. The letter inside was dated just 2 weeks before his death, and his words reached across the divide between life and death to comfort me one more time. "My dearest Amy," it began, "if you're reading this, then you've discovered the truth about my will, and your siblings have likely shown their true colors. I want you to know that every decision I made was deliberate and based on years of careful observation. You have spent your entire adult life putting everyone else's needs before your own. You've sacrificed opportunities, relationships, and dreams to take care of this family, and you've never asked for anything in return except to be loved and valued. Instead, Linda and Michael have treated you like an unpaid employee, someone whose time and energy they were entitled to without consideration or gratitude. I've watched them take and take and take while giving nothing back. I've listened to them discuss you as if you were a convenience rather than a person with your own hopes and needs. I've seen them make plans that excluded you, make assumptions about your availability, and dismiss your feelings when they didn't align with their wants. The will I've written is not about money, Amy. It's about justice. It's about finally giving you the respect and consideration you've always deserved. The conditions I've set for Linda and Michael are not impossible to meet. They simply require them to treat you as an equal family member rather than a servant. If they choose to meet those conditions, they'll prove that they're capable of change and growth. If they choose to fight the will instead, they'll prove that their sense of entitlement is more important to them than their relationship with you. Either way, you'll finally know where you stand with them, and you'll have the resources to build the life you want, rather than the life everyone else has expected you to live. You've been the best daughter a man could ask for, Amy. You've been loving, generous, patient, and kind even when kindness wasn't returned. Now it's time for you to be something else. Free. Use this freedom wisely. Travel if you want to. Move if you want to. Say no when you want to. Put yourself first for once in your life. You've earned it 1,000 times over. I love you, sweetheart. I'm proud of you, and I hope you'll finally learn to be proud of yourself too. All my love, Daddy. I sat on his bed and cried, not the grief-stricken tears I'd shed since his death, but something deeper and more cathartic. I cried for all the years I'd spent trying to earn love that should have been freely given. I cried for all the sacrifices that had gone unnoticed and unappreciated. I cried for the woman I might have been if I'd learned earlier to value myself as much as I valued others. But mostly, I cried with relief. Relief that I wasn't crazy, that the patterns I'd noticed were real and valid. Relief that Daddy had seen what I'd been afraid to acknowledge. Relief that I was finally truly free to make choices based on my own wants and needs rather than everyone else's expectations. The rest of the day passed quietly. I called my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, and asked if she'd like to have lunch the next day. She seemed delighted by the invitation, and I realized it had been years since I'd made social plans that weren't centered around family obligations. I also called the travel agency downtown and asked them to send me brochures for European River cruises. I'd always wanted to see the castles along the Rhine, but there had never been time or money for such luxuries. Now there was both. That evening, I cooked dinner for one and didn't feel lonely. I felt purposeful. I felt like a person whose preferences mattered, whose time had value, whose happiness was worth pursuing. The phone calls continued throughout the evening. Linda, Michael, even Jennifer trying to guilt me into being reasonable. I let them all go to voicemail. Their urgency was not my emergency anymore. Around 9 o'clock, there was another knock. At the door. This time it was Jennifer, looking uncomfortable and young despite her 34 years. Unlike her mother, she hadn't come in anger but in confusion. "Aunt Amy? Can we talk?" I let her in, noting that she seemed genuinely distressed rather than entitled. "Of course, sweetheart. Would you like some tea?" "That would be nice, thank you." We sat in the kitchen, and I could see her struggling with how to begin. "Mom is really upset," she said finally. "I imagine she is. She says Grandpa cut her and Uncle Michael out of his will completely. Is that true?" "Not completely. They can still inherit, but there are conditions they need to meet." "What kind of conditions?" I studied her face, looking for signs of the same entitlement that marked her mother and uncle. Instead, I saw genuine curiosity and concern. The conditions require them to acknowledge how they've treated me over the years and to commit to treating me as an equal family member going forward. Jennifer was quiet for a long moment. "Aunt Amy, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Have Mom and Uncle Michael been awful to you? I mean, I know they can be. Demanding. And I know you've always been the one who took care of Grandma and Grandpa. But have they really been that bad?" The question was asked with such genuine innocence that I realized Jennifer had never witnessed the worst of her family's behavior toward me. She'd seen the surface, the holiday gatherings, the polite interactions, but not the behind-the-scenes reality of their expectations and demands. "Let me ask you something, Jennifer. When was the last time your mother asked about my health, my happiness, or my plans without needing something from me?" She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again, frowning in concentration. "When was the last time she offered to help me with something instead of asking me to help her?" More silence. "When was the last time she acknowledged that I might have my own needs and desires instead of assuming I existed solely to meet everyone else's?" Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Aunt Amy, I never realized." "Most people don't, sweetheart. Your mother isn't cruel or malicious. She's just never learned to see me as a complete person with my own life to live. To her, I'm the reliable sister who's always available, always willing to help, never needing help in return." "But that's not fair." "No, it's not. And your grandfather recognized that. He wanted to make sure that either your mother and uncle learn to treat me better, or I'm free to build relationships with people who do value me." Jennifer wiped her eyes with a tissue. "What can I do to help?" The question surprised me. It was the first time anyone in my family had asked how they could help me, instead of asking me how I could help them. "Nothing, honey. This is between me and my siblings. But I appreciate you asking." She hugged me before she left, and it felt different from the perfunctory embraces I was used to receiving from family members. It felt genuine, caring, like she was actually present in the moment. That night, I slept better than I had in months. My dreams were filled not with anxiety and obligation, but with possibilities. I dreamed of river cruises and art classes, of friendships based on mutual respect rather than one-sided service. of a life lived according to my own values rather than everyone else's expectations. When I woke the next morning, I felt lighter, as if I'd been carrying a weight I hadn't even realized was there. The phone was ringing, but I let it ring. Whatever crisis my family was having, whatever demands they were making, whatever guilt they were trying to impose, it could wait. For the first time in 72 years, Amy Richardson was putting herself first, and the world hadn't ended. In fact, it was just beginning. The appointment with Mr. Whitman was scheduled for 2 o'clock on Thursday, and I found myself strangely excited to witness what would unfold. I arrived at his office 30 minutes early, ostensibly to review documents, but really to savor the anticipation of watching my siblings confront the consequences of their behavior for the first time in their lives. Mrs. Collier greeted me with her usual warmth and a conspiratorial smile. "Mr. Whitman is looking forward to this meeting," she whispered. "He's been practicing law for 50 years, and he says this is one of the most thorough documentations of family dysfunction he's ever seen. Daddy was very methodical when he set his mind to something. Indeed he was. Would you like to sit in on the meeting, or would you prefer to wait here?" I considered this carefully. Part of me wanted to watch Linda and Michael squirm as they learned the extent of Daddy's observations. But another part of me recognized that my presence might make them defensive and less likely to hear what they needed to hear. "I think I'll wait here initially. If Mr. Whitman needs me, I'll be available." At exactly 2 o'clock, Linda and Michael arrived, dressed in their finest professional attire as if they were attending a board meeting rather than learning about their father's final wishes. Linda wore a sharp black suit that probably cost more than I spent on clothes in a year, while Michael had donned his best funeral suit and an expression of grim determination. They barely acknowledged me as Mrs. Collier ushered them into Mr. Whitman's office. Through the thick oak door, I could hear muffled voices rising and falling, occasional sharp exclamations, and long periods of silence that suggested they were reading documents. After an hour, the office door opened and Mr. Whitman emerged, looking composed but slightly weary. "Amy, could you join us, please? I think your siblings have some questions that require your input." I entered the office to find Linda and Michael sitting rigidly in their chairs, their faces pale and their expressions ranging from shock to indignation. The conference table was covered with documents, photographs, and what appeared to be transcripts of conversations. "Amy," Mr. Whitman said, settling back into his chair, "I've just finished explaining to Linda and Michael the detailed conditions your father established for their potential inheritances. I've also shared some of the documentation he compiled regarding family interactions over the past 2 years." Linda's voice was tight with controlled fury. "These so-called conditions are insulting and demeaning. Dad was clearly not in his right mind when he wrote this will." "Actually," Mr. Whitman replied calmly, "your father underwent a comprehensive mental competency evaluation just 3 months before his death. Dr. Martinez found him to be completely lucid and of sound mind. The evaluation is part of the record." Michael leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly. "Mr. Whitman, with all due respect, our father was obviously being influenced by someone who had access to him daily, someone who could have painted us in an unfavorable light." "Are you suggesting that Amy manipulated your father?" "I'm saying it's possible. She was the only one with regular access to him. She could have told him anything." Mr. Whitman opened a thick folder and pulled out several sheets of paper. "These are transcripts of recorded phone conversations between your father and each of you. They span the past 18 months and document numerous instances of what he perceived as dismissive, entitled, and disrespectful behavior toward Amy. Would you like me to read some examples?" The silence in the room was deafening. I could see Linda and Michael exchanging worried glances, probably trying to remember what they might have said in private conversations with Daddy. "That's illegal," Linda said finally. "He can't record conversations without our consent." "Actually, in this state, one-party consent laws apply. Your father was legally entitled to record conversations he participated in. But more importantly, these recordings weren't made in secret or with malicious intent. They were made by a concerned father who wanted to document patterns of behavior that troubled him. Mr. Whitman put on his reading glasses and selected a transcript. This is from a conversation between your father and you, Linda, from March of this year. Would you like to hear what you said about Amy's availability to babysit your grandchildren during spring break? No, Linda said quickly. That's not necessary. I think it is necessary, I said quietly. I think it's time for some honesty in this family. Mr. Whitman cleared his throat and began reading. Linda Richardson to Harold Richardson, March 15th. Dad, I need Amy to watch the kids for a week while Jennifer and David go on their anniversary trip. I know she doesn't have any real obligations anymore, so it shouldn't be a problem. Just tell her it's important family business. The words hung in the air like an accusation. I remembered that week clearly. 7 days of caring for Jennifer's 2 young children while struggling with a severe case of bronchitis I hadn't wanted to admit to because I knew Linda was counting on me. Harold Richardson to Linda Richardson. Have you asked Amy if she's available? She might have her own plans. Linda Richardson. What plans could she possibly have? She never goes anywhere or does anything. Besides, family comes first, right? She knows that. Michael shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Conversations taken out of context can sound worse than they are. Can they? Mr. Whitman turned to another transcript. This is from a conversation between your father and you, Michael, from August. You were calling to ask for a loan to cover your son's college expenses. Michael Richardson to Harold Richardson, August 3rd. I hate to ask, Dad, but we're short on Tommy's tuition money. Could you help us out? Harold Richardson. Have you considered asking Amy for assistance? She's helped the family financially many times. Michael Richardson. Amy doesn't have real money, Dad. She's got that little teacher's pension and whatever she saved from her job at the library. I need serious money, not pocket change. I felt a familiar stab of hurt. My pocket change had helped pay for Michael's business expenses, Linda's home renovations, and countless family emergencies over the years. Money I'd saved by living frugally, denying myself luxuries, and working part-time jobs well into my 60s. The transcript continues, Mr. Whitman said. Harold Richardson. Amy has been very generous with this family over the years. Perhaps it's time others stepped up to help each other. Michael Richardson. Come on, Dad. Amy helps because she doesn't have anything else to do with her time or money. She's not married, doesn't have kids, doesn't travel. What else is she going to do with her life? The casual dismissal of my entire existence was breathtaking in its cruelty. According to Michael, my value was measured solely by my availability to serve others, my worth determined by what I could provide rather than who I was as a person. Linda's composure was beginning to crack. Those conversations were private. We had no idea Dad was recording them. No, you didn't, I said, finding my voice. You had no idea he was listening when you talked about me like I was a household appliance instead of a human being. That's not fair, Amy. We've never thought of you that way. Haven't you? When was the last time either of you asked about my dreams, my goals, my desires? When did you last inquire about my health without needing something from me? When did you ever consider that I might want to travel or date or pursue hobbies or have a life that didn't revolve around your needs? Mr. Whitman consulted another document. Your father documented 47 instances over 18 months where family members requested Amy's assistance with various tasks: babysitting, pet care, house sitting, financial loans, transportation, meal preparation for family events, and care for aging relatives. In that same period, he documented 0 instances of family members offering to help Amy with anything. We would have helped if she'd asked, Michael protested. Would you have? Because according to this transcript from last December, When Amy mentioned she was feeling overwhelmed with caring for your father and managing the household, you said, and I quote, "That's what she's good at, Dad. Amy's always been the responsible one. She can handle anything." The words I'd never heard, but had always suspected, hung between us like a judgment. I was the responsible one, which in Richardson, family terms meant the one who could be counted on to sacrifice her own needs for everyone else's convenience. Linda stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Fine. Maybe we could have been more considerate. Maybe we took Amy's help for granted sometimes, but that doesn't justify Dad cutting us out of his will. He didn't cut you out entirely, Mr. Whitman reminded her. He established conditions for your inheritance that reflect his desire to see the family relationships improve. What exactly are these conditions? Michael asked reluctantly. Mr. Whitman referred to the will. First, you must participate. In a family meeting facilitated by this office where you acknowledge the patterns of behavior your father documented and apologize to Amy for taking advantage of her generosity. That's humiliating, Linda snapped. Second, you must establish a written agreement outlining how family responsibilities will be shared equitably going forward, including care for elderly relatives, financial support during emergencies, and emotional support during difficult times. You want us to sign a contract to be a family? Michael's voice was incredulous. Third, you must demonstrate genuine effort to include Amy in family decisions and social activities as an equal participant, rather than an unpaid service provider. This is ridiculous, Linda said, but there was less conviction in her voice than before. Fourth, you must make financial restitution for documented loans and expenses Amy has covered for family members over the past 10 years. The silence that followed was profound. I could see them calculating the amounts in their heads. The down payment I'd helped with for Michael's first house, the credit card debt I'd paid off for Linda during her divorce, the countless smaller loans that had never been repaid. How much are we talking about? Michael asked weakly. Mr. Whitman consulted a ledger. Based on Amy's financial records and your father's documentation, approximately $43,000 in unpaid loans and expenses. Linda sank back into her chair. We don't have that kind of money just lying around. The restitution can be made over time, with reasonable payment plans. Your father wasn't trying to bankrupt anyone. He simply wanted to see some recognition of Amy's financial sacrifices. And if we meet all these conditions, Michael asked, then you would each inherit 1/3 of the remainder of the estate after Amy receives her primary bequest. The house, the investment portfolio, and the life insurance proceed to Amy regardless, but there are other assets that would be divided among the three of you. What other assets? Linda demanded. Your father's collection of antique tools, valued at approximately $15,000. His coin collection worth about $8,000. The vintage car in the garage, which could bring $20,000 at auction. Various other personal effects and small investments. I could see them doing the math, weighing their pride against their financial gain. The amounts weren't life-changing, but they weren't insignificant either. We need time to think about this, Linda said finally. Of course, you have 90 days to decide whether to meet the conditions or contest the will in court. But I should warn you that your father's documentation is extremely comprehensive. A court challenge would be expensive and likely unsuccessful. What happens if we choose neither option? Michael asked. Then your portions of the conditional inheritance would be donated to charity. Your father specified several organizations that were meaningful to him. After Linda and Michael left, looking shell-shocked and subdued, I remained in Mr. Whitman's office to discuss the practical implications of what had just occurred. How do you think they'll respond? I asked. Hard to say. Your brother seems more inclined toward compliance than your sister. Linda appears to view the conditions as beneath her dignity. And if they choose to contest the will, they'll lose. Your father was extraordinarily thorough in his preparations. The mental competency evaluation, the recordings, the financial documentation, the witness statements from neighbors and healthcare workers who observe the family dynamics. It's an airtight case. I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction that Daddy's efforts to protect me were so comprehensive, sadness that such protection had been necessary in the first place. "Mr. Whitman, can I ask you something personal?" "Certainly." "In your professional opinion, do you think they'll actually change, or will they just go through the motions to claim their inheritance?" He removed his glasses and cleaned them, thoughtfully. "Amy, I've been practicing family law for 5 decades, and I've seen every possible variation of human behavior. Some people are capable of genuine growth and change when confronted with the consequences of their actions. Others simply learn to hide their true nature more effectively. So there's no way to know. The beauty of your father's plan is that it doesn't matter. If they genuinely change their behavior toward you, then you'll have the family relationships you've always deserved. If they merely pretend to change, you'll see through it eventually, and you'll have the financial resources to build a life surrounded by people who truly value you." That evening, I sat in my living room reading one of the books I'd been meaning to get to for months. It was a luxury I'd rarely allowed myself when every spare moment was consumed with caregiving responsibilities or family obligations. The house was quiet, but it was a peaceful quiet rather than a lonely one. Around 8 o'clock, the phone rang. Jennifer's name appeared on the caller ID, and I answered with genuine pleasure. "Hi, sweetheart." "Aunt Amy, I just talked to Mom, and she told me about the meeting with the lawyer today. I can't believe Grandpa recorded those conversations. Are you upset about it?" "Honestly, no, I think it's brilliant. Mom and Uncle Michael had no idea how they sounded when they talked about you, and maybe they needed to hear it." Jennifer's insight surprised me. At 34, she was showing more emotional intelligence than her mother had developed in 67 years. "Your mother is pretty angry about the whole situation." "Mom's angry because she's embarrassed. She's realizing that her behavior toward you has been documented and she can't deny it anymore. But you know what? Maybe that's what she needs." "What do you mean?" "Mom has always been used to getting her way through intimidation and manipulation. She's never had to face real consequences for treating people badly. Maybe this will teach her something. And if it doesn't, then you'll be better off without her constant demands and criticisms. Aunt Amy, I've been thinking about our conversation the other night, and I realize I've watched Mom treat you like hired help my entire life. I never questioned it because that's just how things were, but it was wrong." The conversation continued for another hour, with Jennifer sharing observations about family dynamics that I'd never heard from anyone else. She talked about feeling guilty for not standing up to her mother's treatment of me, about recognizing the patterns of entitlement that she was determined not to repeat with her own children. After we hung up, I felt a spark of hope that perhaps something positive could emerge from this crisis. Even if Linda and Michael never changed, maybe the next generation could learn different patterns of relating to family members. The next few days passed quietly. I received one brief call from Michael asking for clarification about the restitution requirements, and a longer, more heated call from Linda, demanding to know if I was really going to put them through this humiliation. "I'm not putting you through anything, Linda. Daddy created these conditions, not me. I'm simply respecting his wishes. But you could waive the conditions if you wanted to. You could just divide everything equally and put this whole mess behind us." "Could I? And would that teach you anything about how your behavior has affected me? Would that change how you treat me going forward?" "Amy, for God's sake, we're family. We shouldn't need contracts and conditions to love each other." "You're right, we shouldn't. But apparently we do, because love without respect and consideration isn't really love at all." She hung up without saying goodbye, and I realized that some people would rather sacrifice relationships than admit they were wrong. The weekend brought an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Patterson knocked on my door Saturday morning carrying a casserole dish and wearing an expression of maternal concern. "Amy, dear, I hope you don't mind me dropping by. I made too much tuna casserole and thought you might enjoy some." I invited her in for coffee, grateful for the company and the normalcy of neighborly concern. We sat in the kitchen, and I found myself telling her about the events of the past week. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "I've watched your family dynamics for years, and I always wondered when you'd finally stand up for yourself. You noticed how they treated me?" "Honey, everyone noticed. The way they'd show up expecting you to drop everything for them, the way they'd leave messes for you to clean up after family gatherings, the way they talked about you when they thought no one was listening. Your daddy wasn't the only one keeping track." "What do you mean?" "I mean, there are a lot of people in this community who've watched you sacrifice yourself for that family year after year. We've all been waiting for someone to give you permission to put yourself first for once. The idea that my situation had been visible to others was both embarrassing and validating. Embarrassing because it meant my dysfunction had been on display. Validating because it confirmed that my perceptions weren't distorted by self-pity or oversensitivity. What do you think I should do?" "I think you should stick to your guns, sweetie. Don't let them guilt you into backing down from your father's conditions. If they want to be part of your life, they need to earn it." That afternoon, I made a decision that felt revolutionary in its simplicity. I drove to the travel agency and booked a European river cruise for the following spring. It was something I'd dreamed of for decades but had never believed was possible. Now, with Daddy's inheritance and the freedom from family obligations, it was not only possible but inevitable. The agent, a cheerful woman named Susan, showed me pictures of castles along the Rhine, medieval villages in France, and vineyard-covered hillsides in Austria. For the first time in my life, I was making plans that had nothing to do with anyone else's needs or expectations. "This is a wonderful choice for solo travelers," Susan said. "We have several other women your age who've booked this cruise. I think you'll have a marvelous time." Solo travel. The phrase should have frightened me, but instead it filled me with excitement. I would be responsible only for my own enjoyment, my own schedule, my own experiences. No one would expect me to serve their needs or accommodate their preferences. That evening, I called Jennifer to tell her about the cruise. "Aunt Amy, that's fantastic. I'm so proud of you for doing something just for yourself." "It feels strange, but good strange." "Have you told Mom and Uncle Michael about it?" "No, and I'm not sure I will. They'd probably find a way to make it about them somehow." "You know what? Don't tell them. Let this be yours completely. When you get back, you can share your adventures with people who actually care about your happiness." The wisdom in her words struck me deeply. I didn't owe my siblings updates on my plans or permission to pursue my own interests. They'd forfeited the right to be included in my decision-making when they demonstrated so clearly that they viewed me as a resource, rather than a person. Sunday brought another unexpected development. Michael arrived alone, looking humbled and uncomfortable in a way I'd never seen before. "Amy, can we talk? Just you and me, without Linda steamrolling the conversation?" I let him in, curious about what he might say without his sister's influence. "I've been thinking about what Mr. Whitman showed us," he began once we were settled in the living room. "Those transcripts, the financial documentation, all of it. And I realize I owe you an apology." "Go on." "I never saw it before, Amy. I never realized how much we've taken from you without giving anything back. I always thought of you as, I don't know, as someone who didn't need the same things the rest of us needed." "What things?" "Recognition, appreciation, help when you were struggling. I honestly believed you were happy just taking care of everyone else, that it fulfilled you somehow." "What made you think that?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Because you never complained. You never said no. You never asked for help or demanded recognition. I thought that meant you didn't need those things." Or maybe it meant I'd learned that asking for them was pointless. Yeah, he said softly. I'm starting to understand that now. We talked for 2 hours, and for the first time in our adult lives, Michael listened more than he spoke. He asked questions about my feelings, my experiences, my perspective on family events I'd always handled alone. He seemed genuinely shocked to learn about the loneliness I'd felt, the financial strain of constantly helping others, the dreams I'd deferred to meet family obligations. Amy, I want to meet Dad's conditions. Not because of the money, although that would be nice, but because I want to try to have a real relationship with you. What about Linda? Linda's still angry and talking about fighting the will. She thinks Dad was manipulated or coerced somehow. She can't accept that her behavior drove him to document everything. And what do you think? I think Dad was protecting the daughter who'd been protecting everyone else for decades. I think he was smarter than any of us gave him credit for, and I think he was right. Michael left that evening with a copy of the conditions and a promise to think carefully about how he wanted to proceed. For the first time since this whole situation began, I felt genuinely hopeful that something positive might emerge from the wreckage of our family relationships. As I prepared for bed, I thought about the changes that had occurred in just 1 week. I'd gone from being the family doormat to being the one holding the cards. I'd gone from feeling powerless and taken for granted to feeling valued and in control of my own destiny. But more importantly, I'd begun to see myself differently. Not as the family member whose only value lay in her willingness to serve others, but as a complete person deserving of respect, consideration, and love. It was a revelation that felt both foreign and familiar, like remembering something I'd always known but had been afraid to acknowledge. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and decisions. She was so determined to contest the will that she was willing to have me investigated for elder abuse, a serious criminal charge that could destroy my reputation and land me in prison. Detective Chen, I understand you have to investigate, but I want you to know that these allegations are completely false. My father's lawyer has extensive documentation of his mental competency and his reasons for structuring his will as he did. We'll need to review all relevant documentation, including medical records, financial statements, and testimony from witnesses who can speak to your father's condition and your relationship with him. Of course, I'll cooperate fully with your investigation. We'll also need to interview family members and others who had contact with your father during his final months. I understand. Detective Chen, can I ask if the person who filed this complaint is also mentioned in my father's will? I can't discuss the details of the complaint, Ms. Richardson, but I will say that we're aware of the family dynamics involved, and we'll take that into consideration during our investigation. After I hung up, I sat in stunned silence for several minutes. Linda had actually accused me of elder abuse. She was so convinced of her own entitlement to Daddy's estate that she was willing to destroy my life to get it. I called Mr. Whitman immediately, and he was as outraged as I was. Amy, this is a desperate move by someone who knows she has no legitimate legal recourse. Don't worry. We have everything we need to prove that Harold was competent and that his decisions were entirely his own. But what about the investigation? What about the damage to my reputation? The investigation will clear you completely. We have medical records, competency evaluations, witness statements, and Harold's own recordings explaining his reasoning. As for your reputation, anyone who knows you will understand that these charges are baseless. What should I do? Cooperate. Fully with the police, but make sure you have legal representation during any formal interviews. I'll handle the documentation they'll need to review. And Amy? This proves exactly what your father suspected about Linda's character. She's willing to destroy you rather than admit she was wrong. The next few days were surreal. Detective Chen and her partner arrived at my house to conduct a formal interview, accompanied by a social worker who specialized in elder abuse cases. They were professional and respectful, but the situation felt like a nightmare. They interviewed Mrs. Patterson, who provided a detailed account of my dedicated care for Daddy and his obvious affection for me. They spoke with Dr. Martinez, who confirmed Daddy's mental competency up until his death. They reviewed months of financial records that showed I'd actually spent my own money on his care rather than accessing his accounts inappropriately. Most importantly, they listened to portions of Daddy's recordings where he explicitly explained his reasoning for the will's structure and his frustration with Linda and Michael's treatment of me. Ms. Richardson, Detective Chen said after 3 days of investigation. Based on our review of the evidence, we found no indication that you committed any form of elder abuse. In fact, all evidence suggests that you provided exemplary care for your father, and that his decisions regarding his will were entirely voluntary and well considered. What happens to the person who filed the false complaint? Filing a falsie. Police report is a crime, but in this case, the complaint was made by someone who genuinely believed wrongdoing had occurred, even if that belief was misguided. We won't be pursuing charges unless evidence emerges that the complaint was made with malicious intent. After the police left, I felt emotionally drained but vindicated. Linda's desperate gambit had not only failed, but had actually strengthened the case for Daddy's will. Her willingness to have me investigated for a serious crime revealed the depths of her selfishness and sense of entitlement. Michael called. That evening, his voice heavy with shame and anger. Amy, I just found out what Linda did. I can't believe she actually called the police on you. Did you know she was planning this? Absolutely not. If I had, I would have stopped her. This is beyond the pale, even for Linda. Where does this leave things with the will conditions? As far as I'm concerned, it settles the matter completely. I want to meet Dad's conditions, Amy. I want to apologize for my behavior and make things right between us. What Linda did proves that she's not interested in being a family. She's only interested in getting what she thinks she's owed. And Linda? Linda can do whatever she wants, but I'm done enabling her behavior. She crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. Michael arrived the following Saturday morning with a folder of documents and an expression of determined humility. We sat in the living room where so many family gatherings had taken place over the years, but this time the dynamic was completely different. Amy, I've prepared a formal apology that addresses the specific ways I've mistreated you over the years, he began, opening his folder. I've also worked out a payment plan for the money I owe you, and I've drafted a proposal for how we can share family responsibilities more equitably going forward. For the next 2 hours, Michael methodically worked through each of Daddy's conditions. His apology was detailed and specific, acknowledging not just general patterns of behavior, but particular incidents where he'd been selfish or dismissive. He provided a realistic timeline for repaying his debts, including interest to compensate for the years of delay. Most importantly, he outlined concrete ways he wanted to include me in family decisions and activities as an equal participant. Michael, I have to ask, are you doing this because you genuinely want to change our relationship, or because you want to inherit Dad's coin collection? He was quiet for a long moment. Honestly, it started as being about the money. I won't lie about that. But going through this process, really thinking about how I've treated you, listening to those recordings of myself talking about you like you were a convenience rather than a person, it's been humbling and eye-opening. And now? Now I realize that the money is the least important thing here. I've had a sister for 59 years, Amy, but I've never really known you as a person. I've never asked about your dreams or your fears or what makes you happy. I've seen you as a function rather than a human being, and that's unforgivable. It's not unforgivable if you're genuinely committed to changing it. I am. And I want to prove it through my actions, not just my words. We spent the rest of the morning talking about family memories from a new perspective. Michael asked questions he'd never thought to ask before, about my marriage to Robert, about the dreams I'd deferred to care for our parents, about the loneliness I'd felt as the only unmarried, childless sibling. He seemed genuinely surprised by how little he'd known about my inner life. "Amy, I want you to know that I support your decision to book that cruise. In fact, I'd like to help you plan it if you're interested. Carol and I went to Europe a few years ago, and we learned some things that might be useful." The offer of help rather than the expectation of service was so foreign that it took me a moment to process it. "That would be wonderful, Michael. Thank you. And when you get back, I want to hear all about it. I want to see pictures and hear stories and celebrate the fact that you finally did something just for yourself." As Michael prepared to leave, he handed me an envelope. "This is the first payment toward what I owe you. It's not much, but it's a start." Inside was a check for $2,000 and a handwritten note. "Thank you for everything you've given this family over the years. It's time we started giving back to you." That afternoon, I called Mr. Whitman to report on Michael's compliance with the will's conditions. "It sounds like he's making a genuine effort," Mr. Whitman said. "What about Linda?" "No word from her since the police investigation concluded. I think she's either regrouping for another attack or finally accepting that she's not going to get what she wants." "And how do you feel about Michael's efforts?" "Cautiously optimistic. He seems sincere, but I've been disappointed before. I think I need to see sustained change over time before I fully trust that this is real." "That's wise, Amy." Linda would likely continue her resistance, and even Michael's apparent change of heart would need to be tested over time. But tonight, for the first time in my adult life, I fell asleep feeling genuinely excited about my future, rather than burdened by my obligations to others. The transformation wasn't complete yet, but it had begun. And that beginning felt like the most precious gift Daddy could have given me. 3 weeks had passed since the explosive meeting at Mr. Whitman's office, and the silence from Linda was becoming deafening. Michael had called twice more, each conversation revealing a man genuinely grappling with the reality of his past behavior. But Linda remained stubbornly absent, her silence speaking volumes about her unwillingness to face the truth about herself. I was tending to Daddy's rose garden on a crisp November morning when Mrs. Patterson called over the fence separating our yards. "Amy, dear, there's a car with Illinois plates parked outside your house. Looks like someone's been sitting there for about an hour." Illinois plates meant Chicago, which meant Jennifer. I brushed the soil from my gardening gloves and walked around to the front of the house, where I found Jennifer's silver sedan parked at the curb. Through the windshield, I could see her talking animatedly on her phone, her free hand gesturing in the way she'd inherited from her mother. She ended her call as I approached and rolled down the window. "Aunt Amy, I'm sorry to just show up like this. I was going to call first, but I was afraid you'd tell me not to come." "Why would I do that?" "Because I'm about to ask you something that might make you angry." I studied her face, noting the dark circles under her eyes and the tension in her shoulders. "Come inside, sweetheart. Whatever it is, we can discuss it properly." Jennifer followed me into the kitchen, declining my offer of coffee but accepting a glass of water. She sat at the kitchen table where I'd shared so many meals with Daddy, her fingers tracing patterns on the wooden surface as she gathered her thoughts. "Aunt Amy, I need to tell you something about Mom's reaction to Grandpa's will." I assumed she was angry about it. She's beyond angry. She's obsessed. She's hired a private investigator to look into Grandpa's final months, trying to find evidence that he was mentally compromised or that someone influenced him to change his will. The news shouldn't have surprised me, but it did. Even knowing Linda's character, I hadn't expected her to go to such lengths to avoid accountability. "Has she found anything?" "No, and that's making her even more frustrated. The investigator talked to Grandpa's doctors, his neighbors, the people at his church, Even the grocery store clerks he chatted with regularly. Everyone says the same thing, that he was sharp as a tack until the very end. Jennifer took a sip of water, her hands trembling slightly. But there's more, Aunt Amy. She's also trying to find dirt on you. What kind of dirt? Anything. She can use to suggest you manipulated Grandpa. She's looking into your finances, your relationships, your activities over the past few years. She's even contacted some of your former colleagues from the library, asking questions about your character and mental state. The violation felt like a physical blow. Linda was so determined to avoid facing her own behavior that she was willing to invade my privacy and attack my reputation. Why are you telling me this? Because it's wrong, and because I think you should know what you're dealing with, but also because I'm hoping you might consider backing down from Grandpa's conditions before this gets even uglier. I sat down, my coffee cup, and looked at Jennifer carefully. Are you asking me to give up my inheritance to protect your mother from the consequences of her actions? I'm asking you to consider whether winning this battle is worth destroying what's left of our family. Jennifer, sweetheart, I didn't start this battle. Your mother did when she decided that her entitlement was more important than my dignity. And I'm not destroying the family. I'm trying to save it by demanding that it be based on mutual respect, rather than exploitation. Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. But she's my mother, Aunt Amy. I love her despite her flaws, and I can't stand watching her tear herself apart over this. Then talk to her about meeting the conditions instead of asking me to abandon them. I've tried. She won't listen. She's convinced that Grandpa was somehow coerced or manipulated, and she's determined to prove it even if it costs her everything. I reached across the table and took Jennifer's hand. Honey, your mother's reaction to this situation is telling you everything you need to know about her character. A person with integrity would look at the evidence and say, I was wrong, and I need to do better. Instead, she's choosing to attack the messenger rather than examine the message. But what if she never comes around? What if this destroys our relationship forever? Then that's her choice. I can't control Linda's decisions, Jennifer. I can only control my own. And I've decided that I'm done being treated like a second-class family member. Jennifer wiped her eyes with a tissue. Uncle Michael thinks she'll eventually come around. He says she just needs time to process everything. What's Michael doing about the conditions? He's working on them. He met with a financial advisor to figure out how to pay back the money he owes you. He's also been calling me and my cousins, asking us about family dynamics and whether we think he's been unfair to you over the years. And what do you tell him? The truth. That we've all watched him and Mom treat you like hired help for as long as we can remember. That it was so normal we didn't even question it until now. Jennifer stayed for another hour, and our conversation meandered through family memories that took on new meaning in light of recent revelations. She shared observations about holiday gatherings where I'd done all the cooking and cleaning while Linda and Michael relaxed and socialized. She remembered birthday parties where I'd been expected to provide childcare while the other adults enjoyed themselves. She recalled countless instances where my needs had been dismissed or ignored in favor of everyone else's convenience. You know what's sad? Jennifer said as she prepared to leave. You're the only family member who ever made me feel truly heard and valued. When I was struggling in college, when I was having problems in my marriage, when I needed advice about parenting, I always came to you, not Mom or Uncle Michael. Because you knew I'd listen without judgment and offer help without conditions. Exactly. And I took that for granted just like everyone else did. I'm sorry, Aunt Amy. I should have seen what was happening and spoken up. You were a child when most of this pattern was established, sweetheart. You're not responsible for your mother's choices or your uncle's behavior. After Jennifer left, I spent the afternoon thinking about our conversation and Linda's increasingly desperate attempts to invalidate Daddy's will. The private investigator, the character assassination, the refusal to consider that she might be wrong, it all painted a picture of someone so invested in her own righteousness that she couldn't bear to face the truth about herself. That evening brought an unexpected phone call from a number I didn't recognize. The woman on the other end introduced herself as Detective Sarah Chen from the Chicago Police Department's Elder Abuse Unit. Ms. Richardson, I'm calling because we've received a complaint alleging that you may have financially exploited your elderly father prior to his death. My blood ran cold. Who filed this complaint? I'm not at liberty to discuss that, but I can tell you that we're required to investigate all allegations of elder abuse, regardless of their source. What exactly am I being accused of? The complaint suggests that you isolated your father from other family members and manipulated him into changing his will in your favor. It also alleges that you may have accessed his financial accounts without authorization. Linda had gone nuclear. Real change takes time to prove itself. Mr. Whitman, can I ask you something? Do you think Daddy would be pleased with how this is playing out? I think Harold would be thrilled to see you finally getting the respect you deserve. And I think he'd be proud of you for having the courage to demand it. That evening, I called Jennifer to update her on Michael's progress and to ask if she'd heard from her mother. Mom's been radio silent for the past week, Jennifer said. She's holed up in her house, refusing to take calls or answer the door. David thinks she might be having some kind of breakdown. I'm sorry this is so hard on her, Jennifer. That was never my intention. Aunt Amy, I need to tell you something. After I saw what Mom did with the police investigation, I realized something important. What's that? I realized that I was asking the wrong person to change. I was asking you to be more accommodating instead of asking Mom to be more respectful. I was trying to protect her from consequences instead of helping her learn from them. That's a very mature insight, sweetheart. I love my mother, but I can't support her behavior anymore. What she did to you was cruel and vindictive, and it showed me a side of her I don't want to emulate. You're not responsible for your mother's choices, Jennifer. You can love her while still recognizing that her behavior is wrong. Uncle Michael called me yesterday to apologize for his part in how the family treated you. He asked if I thought you'd be interested in having a relationship with him and Aunt Carol based on mutual respect rather than obligation. What did you tell him? I told him that was up to you, but that I hoped you'd give him a chance to prove he's changed. And I told him that if he ever went back to treating you like hired help, I'd call him out on it personally. The conversation with Jennifer gave me hope that the next generation might break the cycle of dysfunction that had defined the Richardson family for so long. Perhaps something good could emerge from this painful process after all. Later that week, I received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Martinez, Daddy's physician for the past 15 years, stopped by to check on me and express his condolences. Amy, I wanted you to know how sorry I am about the police investigation. Harold, I was lucky to have you as his advocate during his illness. Thank you, Dr. Martinez. That means a lot. I also wanted you to know that Harold discussed his will with me several months before his death. He was very clear about his reasoning and very concerned about your well-being after he was gone. What did he say? He said he'd watched you sacrifice your own happiness for this family for decades, and he wanted to make sure you'd have the resources to finally live your own life. He also said he hoped the conditions he was setting would either teach your siblings to treat you better or free you from their demands completely. Did he seem conflicted about his decision? Not at all. He was very peaceful about it, actually. He said he'd spent his whole life watching you give without receiving, and he wanted to balance the scales while he still could. After Dr. Martinez left, I sat in Daddy's favorite chair and thought about the journey I'd been on since his death. 6 weeks ago, I'd been a grieving daughter who believed her only value lay in serving others. Now I was a woman discovering her own worth and learning to demand the respect she deserved. The transformation wasn't complete yet. Linda's silence suggested she might be planning another attack, and even Michael's apparent change would need to be tested over time. But for the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was living my own life rather than the life everyone else expected me to live. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and decisions, but tonight, I was going to plan my European cruise and dream about the adventures that awaited me. For 72 years, I'd put everyone else's dreams before my own. It was time to see what it felt like to make my own dreams come true. Christmas morning arrived with a dusting of snow that made the world look clean and new, much like how I felt about my own life. It had been 2 months since the police investigation cleared me of Linda's malicious accusations, and the silence from my sister had become its own kind of communication. She'd made her choice, and surprisingly, I found myself at peace with it. Michael and Carol arrived at 10 o'clock, carrying wrapped presents and genuine smiles. This was the first holiday gathering I'd hosted without the underlying expectation that I would do all the cooking, cleaning, and organizing while everyone else relaxed. Instead, Carol had insisted on bringing the ham, Michael had prepared his famous sweet potato casserole, and Jennifer was driving down from Chicago with homemade dinner rolls and her children. "Amy, the house looks beautiful," Carol said, admiring the decorations I'd chosen specifically for my own taste rather than maintaining family traditions that had never really belonged to me. Gone were the formal, stuffy arrangements Mama had always insisted upon. In their place were whimsical touches that reflected my personality, colorful glass ornaments, twinkling lights in unexpected places, and a tree topped with a star I'd bought during a solo shopping trip just because it made me smile. "Thank you. It feels good to decorate for myself for once." Michael helped me set the table, and I noticed how different his behavior had become over the past 2 months. He asked where I wanted things placed rather than assuming he knew best. He complimented the changes I'd made to the house rather than criticizing deviations from family tradition. Most importantly, he seemed to actually see me as a person with opinions and preferences worth considering. "Amy, I've been meaning to ask about your cruise plans. Have you finalized everything?" "I leave in 6 weeks. The anticipation is almost as exciting as the trip itself will be. You know, I was thinking, when you get back, maybe we could start a new family tradition. Monthly dinners where we actually talk to each other instead of just going through the motions." The suggestion surprised me with its thoughtfulness. "I'd like that, Michael, but only if everyone participates equally in planning and preparation." "Absolutely. Carol and I have already discussed it. We want to show you that we can contribute to this family instead of just taking from it." Jennifer arrived with her husband David and their 2 children, Emma and Jake, ages 7 and 9. The kids rushed to hug me with genuine affection, and I realized they'd always seen me as their fun great aunt rather than as hired help. Children, it seemed, were naturally better at valuing people for who they were, rather than what they could provide. "Aunt Amy, Mom said you're going on a big boat to Europe," Emma announced, her eyes wide with excitement. "I am indeed. Would you like to see some pictures of where I'm going?" I showed them the cruise brochures, pointing out castles and ancient cities, and found myself genuinely excited to share my plans with family members who seemed genuinely interested in my happiness. During dinner, the conversation flowed naturally for the first time in memory. Instead of the usual pattern where everyone talked about their own lives while I listened and served, people asked me questions about my plans, my thoughts, my experiences. When Jennifer mentioned a work challenge she was facing, Michael offered advice instead of automatically turning to me to solve the problem. When David talked about wanting to renovate their kitchen, Carol suggested contractors instead of assuming I would research options for them. "You know what's different about today?" Jennifer said as we cleared the dessert plates. "Everyone's actually present. We're not rushing through dinner to get to the next obligation or checking our phones constantly. We're just here, enjoying each other's company." "Maybe that's what family dinners should be like," I said. "Maybe the point is connection rather than efficiency." As the afternoon wore on, I found myself observing the family dynamics with new clarity. The children played contentedly, secure in the knowledge that they were loved and valued for themselves. The adults engaged in genuine conversation, sharing ideas and experiences rather than making demands or criticisms. This was what family could be when it was based on mutual respect rather than exploitation. Around 4 o'clock, a car pulled into my driveway. Through the window, I could see Linda getting out of her Mercedes, moving slowly as if each step required enormous effort. She stood by her car for several minutes, staring at the house, before finally walking to the front door. The knock was soft, tentative, completely unlike Linda's usual authoritative presence. I answered the door to find my sister looking older and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. Her perfectly styled hair showed gray roots, her expensive clothes hung loosely on her frame, and her eyes held a vulnerability I'd never witnessed before. "Amy," she said quietly, "may I come in?" I stepped aside without speaking, and she entered the living room where our family was gathered. The conversation stopped as everyone turned to look at her, the tension palpable. "Linda," Michael said, his voice carefully neutral. "We weren't expecting you." "I know. I wasn't sure I'd have the courage to come until I was actually in the driveway." Jennifer stood and moved toward her mother, but Linda held up a hand to stop her. "Please let me say what I came to say before I lose my nerve." She turned to face me directly, and I could see tears forming in her eyes. "Amy, I owe you an apology. Not just for having you investigated by the police, but for 67 years of treating you like you existed solely for my convenience." The silence in the room was profound. Everyone seemed to be holding their breath, waiting to see if this was genuine remorse or another manipulation. I spent the past 2 months in therapy, trying to understand why I reacted so violently to Dad's will. My therapist helped me realize that I wasn't really angry about the money. I was angry about being forced to confront the truth about myself. Linda's voice broke slightly, but she continued. "The truth is that I've been a terrible sister to you, Amy. I've been selfish, entitled, and cruel. I've taken your generosity for granted and treated your kindness as weakness. I've demanded respect from you while showing you none in return." She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is a letter I've written detailing every instance I can remember of mistreating you, asking for your help without offering assistance in return, and dismissing your needs in favor of my own convenience. There are 43 specific incidents listed, and I'm sure there are many more I've forgotten or was too self-absorbed to notice." I took the letter but didn't open it. "Linda, what do you want from me?" "I want to try to earn your forgiveness. I want to meet Dad's conditions, not because I care about the inheritance, but because I want to try to have a real relationship with you before it's too late." Michael leaned forward in his chair. "Linda, it's going to take more than one apology to undo decades of damage. I know that. Dr. Morrison, my therapist, helped me understand that change is a process, not an event. I'm prepared to do the work, Amy. I'm prepared to prove that I can treat you with the respect you deserve." Jennifer spoke up for the first time. "Mom, what changed? 2 months ago, you were convinced Aunt Amy had manipulated Grandpa." Linda's face flushed with shame. 2 months ago, I was so invested in being right that I couldn't see the truth. The police investigation forced me to really examine the evidence Dad had compiled, not with the goal of discrediting it, but with the goal of understanding it." She turned back to me. "Amy, when I listened to those recordings of myself talking about you, I heard someone I didn't recognize. Someone cruel and dismissive and completely lacking in empathy. I heard myself reducing you to a function rather than acknowledging you as a person. What specifically made you change your mind?" "There was one recording from last spring where Dad asked me when I'd last done something nice for you, something that wasn't prompted by a request or an obligation. I laughed and said I didn't need to do nice things for you because you were happy just helping everyone else." Linda wiped tears from her eyes. Dad's response was, "Linda, Amy is happy to help because she's a generous person, but that doesn't mean she doesn't deserve kindness in return. When was the last time you asked about her happiness, instead of assuming you knew what made her happy?" The memory seemed to physically pain her. "I couldn't answer him, Amy. I realized I had no idea what actually made you happy because I'd never bothered to ask. I'd spent 67 years assuming you were fulfilled by serving others because it was convenient for me to believe that." The room remained quiet as Linda continued. "Dr. Morrison asked me to imagine how I would feel if my own daughter treated me the way I've treated you. The thought was so painful I couldn't even complete the exercise. I studied Linda's face, looking for signs of manipulation or performance. Instead, I saw genuine anguish and what appeared to be authentic self-awareness. Linda, assuming I'm willing to consider forgiving you, what would change look like? How would I know this isn't just another way to get what you want? I've thought about that extensively. I want to start by making financial restitution for all the money you've spent on me and my family over the years. I've calculated what I owe you with interest, and it comes to $57,000. Michael whistled softly. "Linda, that's more than what Dad documented." "Because Dad only had records going back 10 years. I went back further and included everything I could remember. Loans for my divorce attorney, help with Jennifer's college, expenses, the down payment on my condo, countless smaller amounts over the years." She handed me another document. "This is a payment plan that would have everything repaid within 18 months. I've also established a trust fund for your future care needs, Amy. If you ever require assistance as you age, you'll have resources that don't depend on family generosity." The gesture was so unexpected and comprehensive that it took my breath away. "Linda, that's incredibly thoughtful." "It's not thoughtful, it's overdue. You've been the family's safety net for decades. It's time you had a safety net of your own." Carol spoke up from across the room. "Linda, this is a complete turnaround from how you've approached this situation. What convinced you that Amy wasn't manipulating your father?" "The recordings convinced me. Not just the content, but Dad's tone when he talked about Amy. He wasn't angry or vindictive when he discussed the will. He was protective. He spoke about Amy the way I wish someone would speak about me if I were being mistreated." Linda turned to face the entire room. "I also want to apologize to all of you for the disruption my behavior has caused. Jennifer, I'm sorry you were put in the position of trying to mediate between me and Amy. Michael, I'm sorry I tried to pressure you into supporting my legal challenge. And children," she said, addressing Emma and Jake directly, "I'm sorry your great aunt and I haven't been setting a good example of how family members should treat each other." Emma, with the directness that only children possess, asked, "Are you going to be nice to Aunt Amy now?" "I'm going to try very hard to be nice to Aunt Amy, sweetheart. But more than that, I'm going to try to be fair to her." The conversation continued for another 2 hours, with Linda answering questions about her therapy, her understanding of the family dynamics, and her plans for changing her behavior. She spoke with a humility I'd never seen from her before, acknowledging not just specific incidents, but the underlying patterns of entitlement and selfishness that had driven them. "Amy," she said as the afternoon drew to a close, "I know I have no right to ask this, but would you be willing to give me a chance to prove I've changed? I understand if you need time to think about it, or if you decide the damage is too great to repair." I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw something I'd never seen before. Genuine remorse, coupled with authentic determination to change. The vulnerability in her eyes was real, and the shame she carried seemed to have taught her something important about herself. "Linda, I'm willing to consider it, but I have conditions of my own." "Of course. What would you need to see?" "First, I need to see sustained change in your behavior, not just toward me but toward others. I need to see evidence that you've learned to value people for who they are, rather than what they can do for you. Understood. Second, I need you to respect my boundaries when I say no to requests for help. Part of the old pattern was that my no was never really accepted as final. Absolutely. Third, I want you to actively participate in family relationships rather than just consuming them. That means asking about others' lives, offering help without being asked, and showing genuine interest in people's happiness and well-being. I can do that. I want to do that. And finally, I need you to understand that forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. I may be willing to move forward with you, but I won't pretend the past didn't happen or that trust can be rebuilt overnight. Linda nodded emphatically. I wouldn't want you to forget, Amy. I want you to remember so that you'll hold me accountable if I start slipping back into old patterns. As the family prepared to leave that evening, the atmosphere felt different from any holiday gathering. In memory. Instead of the usual exhaustion and resentment that came from managing everyone else's needs, I felt energized by the possibility of genuine family relationships based on mutual respect. Michael hugged me at the door. Amy, I want you to know how proud I am of how you've handled this entire situation. You've been gracious and strong, and you've forced all of us to become better people. I didn't force anything, Michael. I just stopped accepting behavior that made me feel worthless. Well, whatever you call it, it worked. I feel like I'm finally getting to know my sister for the first time. Jennifer lingered after the others had left. Aunt Amy, do you really think Mom has changed, or is this just another manipulation? I don't know yet, sweetheart, but I think she's earned the right to try to prove herself. The therapy seems to have helped her understand things about herself that she was blind to before. And if she reverts to her old behavior, then I'll have learned something important about her character, and I'll adjust my expectations accordingly. But I have to believe that people can change, or there's no hope for any of us. That night, I sat in Daddy's chair reading the letter Linda had written detailing her past behavior. It was painful to read, but also validating. She'd remembered. Incidents I thought she'd completely forgotten, acknowledged hurts I thought she'd never noticed, and taken responsibility for patterns I thought she'd never recognize. At the bottom of the letter, she'd written, Amy, you have been the heart of this family for decades, giving love freely even when it wasn't returned. I hope I can learn to love like you do, without conditions, without expectations, and without keeping score. I'm sorry it took me 67 years to see how special you are. The next morning brought a phone call from Mr. Whitman. Amy, Linda called my office this morning requesting an appointment to discuss the will conditions. She seems to understand that she needs to meet them formally, not just apologize privately. How do you think we should handle that? I think we should schedule a family meeting where all three of you can address the conditions together. That way, everyone understands their commitments and responsibilities going forward. And if Linda follows through on everything she's promised, then your father's plan will have worked exactly as he intended. He'll have either forced your siblings to treat you with respect or freed you from their demands. Either outcome serves your best interests. The formal family meeting took place the following week, with all three of us present along with Mr. Whitman as mediator. Linda presented her formal apology, her financial restitution plan, and her proposals for more equitable family dynamics. Michael reaffirmed his commitment to the changes he'd already begun implementing. Together, they signed agreements outlining how family responsibilities would be shared and how decisions would be made collaboratively rather than unilaterally. Your father would be very pleased with this outcome, Mr. Whitman said as we concluded the meeting. He wanted to see you valued and respected, Amy, and he wanted to see your siblings learn to be better family members. It appears his plan has succeeded. As winter turned to spring, Linda's behavior remained consistently different. She called regularly to check on my well-being without needing anything from me. She offered to help with projects around the house, and when I declined, she accepted my refusal gracefully. She asked thoughtful questions about my cruise plans and seemed genuinely excited about my upcoming adventure. Most importantly, she began treating others differently too. I watched her offer assistance to elderly neighbors, volunteer at the local food bank, and show genuine interest in Jennifer's children's activities rather than viewing them as obligations to endure. The transformation wasn't perfect. Old habits occasionally surfaced, and there were moments when I could see her struggling with her instinct to put her own needs first. But the effort was consistent and authentic, and gradually, I began to trust that the change was real. 3 weeks before my cruise departure, Linda surprised me with an unexpected gift. She arrived at my house carrying a beautifully wrapped package and wearing an expression of nervous anticipation. "Amy, I know you have everything you need for your trip, but I wanted to give you something special." Inside the box was an exquisite leather travel journal embossed with my initials. "I thought you might want to record your adventures," she said. "And when you get back, I'd love to hear about every castle, every vineyard, every sunset you see." The gift represented something I'd never received from Linda before: consideration for my interests and experiences rather than her own needs and preferences. "Linda, this is beautiful. Thank you." "Amy, can I tell you something?" "Of course. I'm genuinely happy for you. Not because I think I should be, but because I actually am. For the first time in my life, I'm experiencing what it feels like to care about someone else's happiness without worrying about how it affects me." "How does it feel?" "It feels like being part of something bigger than myself. It feels like love, I think. Real love, not the conditional kind I've been giving and expecting." The morning of my departure arrived with perfect spring weather and a heart full of anticipation. Michael drove me to the airport, and Linda and Jennifer met us there to see me off. As I hugged each of them goodbye, I realized that I was finally living the life Daddy had wanted for me, a life where I was valued, respected, and free to pursue my own happiness. During the flight to Amsterdam, I opened the travel journal Linda had given me and wrote my first entry. "Today begins the adventure I never thought I'd have. I'm 72 years old, traveling alone for the first time in my life, and I've never felt more excited about the future." Daddy's gift wasn't just the inheritance. It was the courage to finally put myself first and the wisdom to know that I deserved better than I was accepting. The cruise exceeded every expectation I'd harbored. I made friends with other solo travelers, learned to navigate foreign cities with confidence, and discovered parts of myself that had been dormant for decades. Each evening, I wrote in my journal, recording not just the sights I'd seen, but the woman I was becoming. When I returned home 2 weeks later, my family gathered to hear about my adventures. For the first time in my life, I was the center of attention, not because I was serving others, but because they genuinely wanted to share in my joy. Linda asked detailed questions about the art museums I'd visited. Michael wanted to hear about the castles I'd explored, and Jennifer was fascinated by the new friendships I'd formed. "Aunt Amy, you look different," Emma observed with characteristic childhood insight. "How do I look different, sweetheart?" "Happier. Like you're not worried about something all the time." The observation was remarkably accurate. For 72 years, I'd carried the weight of everyone else's problems and needs. Now, for the first time, I was living my own life, making my own choices, and pursuing my own happiness. That evening, after everyone had gone home, I sat in my living room surrounded by photographs from my trip and gifts I'd brought back for family members who'd actually earned them through their changed behavior. The house felt different now. Not like a place where I waited to serve others, but like a home where I lived my own life. I thought about Daddy and the extraordinary gift he'd given me. Not just the financial inheritance, but the courage to demand respect and the wisdom to recognize my own worth. His plan had worked better than he could have imagined. Not only had my siblings learned to treat me better, but I'd learned to treat myself better too. The phone rang, and Linda's name appeared on the caller ID. Amy, I was just thinking about you and wanted to say goodnight. Sweet dreams, and thank you for giving me the chance to be the sister you deserved all along. As I prepared for bed, I realized that my story had become exactly what it should be. Not a tale of family dysfunction and exploitation, but a story of transformation, redemption, and the power of finally knowing your own worth. Tomorrow would bring new adventures, new choices, and new opportunities to live according to my own values rather than everyone else's expectations. At 72, I was finally free to be myself, and that freedom was the most precious inheritance of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.